All right, then, here we go. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth Dean's Digital Cafe of the spring 2025 term. I'm glad you could join us today. I'm your host, William Letzu, and I'm an assistant professor in the Biological and Chemical Sciences Department here at New York Tech. And on behalf of Dean Moore of the College of Arts and Sciences, I'd like to thank all New York Tech students, faculty, staff, and guests here for tuning in today's event. I'd like to remind you that today's talk is being recorded. We'll be opening the floor for discussion at the end of the presentation, but you should feel free to enter questions and comments into the chat at any time. Also, stay tuned for our upcoming Dean's Digital Cafe page on the CAS section of the New York Tech website, where you'll be able to watch recordings of today's and past events. Before introducing Dr. Calma-Roddin, I'd like to acknowledge the land. The Long Island campus of New York Tech sits on a larger territory known as Pominoke, which was home to numerous indigenous communities, including the local tribes of the Mattincocks and the Merricks. I'd like to acknowledge the land, the sovereignty and stewardship of the native peoples, and their enduring importance, even in this virtual environment, to our working community here today. Okay, and with that, it's now my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Calma-Roddin, Dr. Nicole Calma-Roddin. Dr. Calma-Roddin is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology and Counseling. She received her PhD in cognitive science and a certificate in cognitive neuroscience from Stony Brook University in 2019, where she also studied linguistics and music as an undergraduate. In addition, she earned a professional certificate in ear training and harmony from Berklee College of Music online. Dr. Calma-Roddin joined New York Tech in 2019, where she teaches psychology and statistics at the Old Westbury campus. Her current research is focused on leveraging cognitive science to help students better learn. Her recent work includes the study of response learning activities involving games, songs, and even virtual reality. If you'd like to know more, check out a recent collaboration of hers with Professors Kevin Park and Jackie Kagren on exploring the structure of proteins and other biomolecules in a VR museum. I'll post that in the chat. Today, she will be telling us about how fun and games can make for effective learning. So with that, welcome, Nicole, and please, we're excited to hear more.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And yeah, thank you all for coming. I see some, lots of familiar faces actually, so I really appreciate the support. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can I have permission? I think it looks like it might be turned off.
There you go. Sorry about that. You should be good to go.
I do that to my students all of the time. All right, so I think there we are. So I want to talk about, so using games and other fun activities to learn. This is something that I've been doing really over the past probably several years at this point, but I'm kind of continuing to adapt and branch out in this. And really, so I'll talk a little bit about throughout the course of this talking about.
Shin has the one that you guys use most often. You can have the other one, but it's a little off topic, so I can tell you which chapter.
Sorry. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, it's also something in the chat, so I want to make sure I have the chat up here as well, so I can see if anyone has questions as I go. But so I will tell you a little bit about kind of, my experience as I'm kind of going through this kind of trajectory and kind of where I'm coming from and my kind of perspective into this. I'll talk a little bit about prior research, some work that I'm doing, and also suggestions for how we can be implementing more of this. I know there's some students here, also a lot of faculty, so I'll try to kind of speak to both of those areas. And so just to start out, like from experience, most of us have a sense that fun keeps us motivated and engaged. And so that's something that when we're doing something that we enjoy, when we're doing something that we find to be fun, we have no problem continuing doing that. And we know also, whether it's as students or as faculty, how key engagement is as a learner, especially in classes or for topics that we might not feel kind of intrinsically motivated towards the content. If there's something that's enjoyable about it or that can get us more engaged, that's going to help. With regard to some different kinds of learning activities and some different kinds of fun, I'll be focusing a lot on games, but I'll also talk a little bit about things like music, and I'll share some resources for other things as well. There's also kind of some really good reasons why, and so I'm coming at kind of at this through kind of the literature from cognitive science, and there's some really good reasons why games and music and other kinds of things work. With regard to music, most of us, again, kind of just talking from experience to start, many of us have really strong musical memories. We recognize lots of different songs. We might have songs that bring us back to specific times in our lives. And so those songs can also kind of be linked to memories that are, just of, episodic memories from our life. We might remember lyrics. This is actually something that most people comment on. Like, I can't remember something that someone told me yesterday, but I can remember lyrics. If the song starts playing, I know lyrics from the song I heard 20 years ago. And in our own educations, we may have learned the alphabet, other information, the days of the week, how a bill becomes a law. We see this getting used. And sometimes I think that it feels a little bit like, we kind of, forget maybe that these strategies aren't just for kids. And sometimes we feel maybe that, for college students or even as adults who are trying to learn something, that using fun activities might feel silly. But there's some good reasons why some of these things work, and I'll talk about kind of as I go. And so with prior research, there is a real kind of rich literature about fun activities, including things like games and songs that increase student engagement. And so using different kinds of activities, some of them including things like live action role play being used in the classroom. Some of those include things like research that has been done. There's a meta-analysis showing that game-based interventions were really effective for increasing knowledge and promoting healthy behaviors. So some of these are in the classroom, some of these are more in an applied setting. And there's different kinds of topics, sociology, social justice, biology, economics, math and statistics. There's all these different kinds of areas that are using these kinds of things. And some of that, also happening, at New York Tech as well. And we also see in the prior literature that lots of literature does suggest that using fun activities, games, songs, and other kinds of things improve learning outcomes. That people, really are, retaining this information. And there's kind of this whole area that's kind of deemed kind of like edutainment, that, are combining these kinds of educational and entertaining kinds of activities. And again, simply from a standpoint, and kind of bringing in the cognitive science, simply from a standpoint of encoding memories, these kinds of things are combining, all different kinds of cues. And so in memory research, we talk about cues. I like to think, I explain cues to my students as they're like clues. I like to think of them almost like little strings that are attached to a memory. And the more cues you have, the easier it is to pull it out of your memory. And when we think about kind of these really rich kinds of activities, something like music, where we have all these things that are combined into this, one kind of stream, the melody, the beat, rhyme, maybe rhythm of the lyrics. There's all these different components. And so all of those are kind of, in one package, kind of wrapped up as these cues that are going to make it more easy to remember. And so if I can remember the melody, that might help, or I can remember the rhythm or the rhyme, I know this word, well, if I know it rhymes with that next line, it's going to kind of, help me to be able to remember what's coming next. And some of that's also coming, when we think about, the game literature. And I'll kind of show you, in my case, I'll be, have been working with a narrative game. And so there's a story going on here. If I remember parts of that, then that might kind of help me remember other parts as well. It's important to note that some research doesn't find these benefits, particularly within the game literature. There are some studies that say that that games don't necessarily provide a benefit. And for instance, Adams et al. Examined a study of games, and they did a project where it was looking at narrative games and comparing it to basically the same content kind of presented via slides, kind of in a more traditional manner. And they concluded that the narrative games didn't give a benefit compared to the slides. In particular, they were really interested. They had a very kind of more visual, kind of discovery-based narrative game. And their study was really looking to examine kind of whether games helped or whether elements of the game that were unrelated to the educational content might distract students, or maybe there was some cognitive overload that was actually making it harder and might actually interfere in learning. So it is important to recognize that there are other theories that, sometimes maybe these things, might not, be the best call. But even in that paper, their discussion really suggested the potential importance of the characteristics of the game and how it's implemented, and that some of this, it might not be, as, especially kind of coming at it from the perspective of, being someone teaching, it's not enough. It's not like, well, games work, so I'm just gonna, if I just, put this into a game and kind of like put a game on top of it, then it's gonna be better. That's really not what we find. It's, if it's more integrated, that might, that's a different story potentially. But more research is really needed here. And it's really, we need to assess kind of different types of games and song activities and other fun activities for how useful they are for education, for their role in this, for engagement. And I'll talk later on about kind of, there might be, some pros and cons and some balance that's, needed as we think about these things. And I'm also really interested, I won't talk about it as much today, some of that work is still in progress, but I'm also interested in kind of the role of individual differences and preferences and different kinds of things like that. For instance, do gamers enjoy game activities more than people who don't identify as gamers, or do they learn more from those kinds of activities? And so, my goal isn't really necessarily to say games are the best way to learn, but when is it the best way to learn, or for who is it the best way to learn? And so eventually that's kind of where I'm heading. But I'll share a little bit more about what I'm doing directly. And so I'll start with kind of the, this kind of part of this project that is, a little more settled. I have some ongoing work. I don't want to share too much about, some of the more recent stuff that I'm doing, because some of it's still happening and there's still data collection to be done, but I'll share a bunch about this. And so again, I'm a cognitive scientist. My work is in general on how we integrate information. Before I was looking at kind of learning, specifically in classroom learning, I was just interested in how we integrate information into a context, into long-term memory. And one of the ways now that I study this is by studying factors that affect how students learn course content. But again, I'm really always trying to bring that cognitive lens to my study of learning. And so I've been doing work on, again, games and songs specifically, particularly implemented into my courses like Introduction to Psychology and Statistical Analysis. Again, today I'm going to focus on the games, but I'll talk a little bit more about the songs as well. And so I was starting out, my premise was I was teaching Introduction to Psychology. I also teach Physiological Basis of Behavior. And one of the topics in both of those courses is neurons and neuron communication, specifically with action potentials. And this was a topic that I've really noticed, students have trouble with this topic, with kind of, going through the process and knowing the process of the action potential and the different steps to that process. And students also in general had trouble engaging in this topic. I really love neurons, that's my thing, but I know that that's not all of my students' thing, and they really had trouble engaging this, and I really wanted to find a way of how could I make this better? How could I make them engage in this? And I really was envisioning initially something really big. I wanted to implement a game. I wanted to do something that was really interactive and visual. How could they, interact with, a neuron to help make the action potential happen so they could interact in those steps. But honestly, I don't have the skills to create those kinds of visuals that I would need in order to do that. And I didn't really have the funding to pay someone else to do that. And so I was trying to really, have this problem of, most games use visuals, and so that's what I'm thinking of, and that's what I think my students are going to expect from a game. Things with animation and lots of bells and whistles. But I also still really wanted to implement something that was going to help my students learn. And so I was coming at this, from, okay, how do I try to do something that I think really should be visual and interactive, but without being able to really make those visuals. And so this was kind of a practical problem on two different levels, because it was like, how do I find a way for my students to engage in this topic? And also just kind of recognizing, there's other instructors out there like me. And I was talking to other people and I was like, oh yeah, it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of, these skills or money to do these different things. now there might be, some conversation maybe about using AI in some of those things, and there's different kind of standpoints on, ethics and how to do that and if to do that and things like that, or whether to do that. But there's also still this obstacle for instructors who maybe don't have the skill, don't have the funding, but still want to implement things like this. And so that was another kind of practical problem that I kind of was interested in, like, well, can we do something like this without visuals and the kind of visuals that students would expect? And would it be effective? And would students still engage with it? Because I wasn't really sure that that would be the case. And so I implemented a text-only narrative game, computer game, into my Introduction to Psychology course. And I kind of came at this premise. I did have the opportunity through CTAL to have take a short course through a workshop with OLC, which helped me kind of learn some elements of Twine, which I'll talk about briefly, and I'll show you just some, really, the game is really simple, but I'll show you some pictures of what it looks like. And in general, though, I kind of was, again, thinking back to the cognitive literature and trying to figure out what's going to work to, how can I have, get the benefit maybe of a visual without having a visual. And I kind of came back to this idea that I know it's hard for my students to care about neurons. They don't, and in intro, for instance, when we teach about child development or prejudice, these are more practical things. Students can see them in their everyday life. They relate to them, they can engage in them. So how can I make my students relate to neurons in the same way? How can I, do this? And if I can't get my students to care about neurons in general, what if I try to get them to care about one particular neuron? Can I make them relate to and care about one neuron? And so that, again, brought me back to, the cognitive literature. And there's this rich cognitive literature on narrative. And there's a research that suggests that readers and watchers of narratives are highly engaged. And again, most of us have experienced this, whether it's books or a television show or a movie. When we're experiencing a narrative in some way, we're engaged. And the research actually suggests that we are interacting really deeply with that narrative content, and that we act as participants. Readers and watchers act as participants rather than mere observers of narratives. And so I really was like, okay, this is what I wanted to do. Can I take a neuron, put in, make this neuron a character, and put a narrative around it that's going to help students. If I can't create those visuals, can I help with words to help the students create those visuals in their minds, maybe make this more interactive and more memorable? And so I really predicted that students who completed this, we wrote this game. I'll show you a little bit of it, and I predicted that students who completed the game prior to a content assessment would perform better related to educational content. And I was predicted and hoped that students would also enjoy the game, find it useful for reviewing, useful for learning. And so I gave them an assessment. I also had some surveys for them as well. And again, I wasn't a given. I did think I could, so this is, one screenshot of kind of what this looks like, and I'll probably stop my share in a minute and share the web browser. So it does just kind of get put into a web browser. This is simple. Black background, white text. There's some hyperlinks that students click through. So this is like, really pared down compared to what students, think of maybe when they think of playing a game. And it wasn't a given to me. I thought I had something that was interesting. I wrote this in a way, frankly, that I found to be, entertaining and fun. I wasn't sure if students were going to feel the same way. I wasn't sure if students were going to engage in this. And so, I definitely had some questions there. I'm going to stop my share for a second here so that I can show you just the browser window itself. And so I created this in Twine software. Twine is, I found to be pretty user-friendly, depending on how much you want to do with it. For just text, it's pretty user-friendly. I definitely found that for other things, I had tried to use some images and things like that. That is possible, but there's some good YouTube and other kinds of help guides, both on their website and on YouTube and things like that. But so I was using that because it seemed like, again, the easiest, user-friendly way that I could find. And then the Twine file kind of is just HTML, and I use GitHub pages to host it online. And so this is what it looks like. The nice part is I can have multiple versions. So this is a version that I kind of share out of the institution, but when I'm running studies in a class or on campus, I can also make other versions to tailor it, to that class slightly, or put different questions or end material in, or link to a different survey or something. So it's nice and flexible that way for kind of research purposes, as well as for teaching. And so it opens up, we kind of have like, magic school bus style kind of situation where we're putting the player character in the situation where they're stepping inside a brain and they've been shrunken down. And then we set the scene a little bit. We have this, the web of neurons around them, different shapes and sizes. We have glial cells, and we see the neurotransmitters floating around. I tried to use a lot of imagery and figurative language as well, which I think is partly just maybe my writing style, writing a story like this, but also I really did want to make it very visual and really be able to, for the students to really relate to things. And so, I described the axons with their myelin sheaths extending like telephone wires. I really wanted people to be able to picture themselves in this place. And so then we see that there's, all these cells are, talking in their own electrochemical way, except for one. And we meet this neuron. At some points in the game, students, again, it's not just a story or a narrative, it is also a game. So students do have or the player character does have some choices. And so we have some options. There is more or less a linear path here. The goal is to expand this and maybe make it a little less linear over time. But right now there is pretty much a linear path here. So we can say hello to this neuron who seems to be looking at us. I'm not sure how a neuron does that, but we feel that it is. We can also back away. And so there are some options here. I won't tell you too much about what happens there. But if we say hello, we'll see that we actually meet this neuron. Again, I won't tell you too much else. We have some dialogue in here, which again, there's some humor being used and other things. I'll kind of take us this far, but probably not too much farther, just to show we're also collecting. We have a point system. The point system needs to be kind of fleshed out a little bit more, and I've gotten some feedback about that. So that's another thing that's on kind of my to-do list that I'm working on. But they're actually collecting sodium ions. Sodium ions are something that's important in that action potential process, and so they do have a purpose later on, but we kind of are collecting these ions as we go through the game. And we didn't see it in the part that I showed, but the neuron that we meet, his name is Ron. So he is Ron the neuron. He's actually a new neuron. So he is new Ron because that's who I am as a person. And so I apologize for that. But so we meet Ron, and because he's new, he really doesn't know actually a lot about how this whole action potential thing works. He sees these other neurons, talking, and he wants to join in, but he really doesn't know how. And so as the player character, we get to, choose to, right now, again, linear path. Eventually, we're going to help Ron. Spoilers, sorry for anyone who may eventually play this game. But we get to help Ron. And by helping Ron, we review this process and maybe learn some new things, but also review this process. And so I designed and wrote the game, and there's also, I had a small summer emerging tech grant that also helped kind of support this, this project and allowed me to focus on this a little bit more. And so we looked at some of the choices, and I want to make sure. And so the choices in the game, I did want to mention one other thing about those. And so they get used in different ways. Mostly, I really wanted students to interact, to feel like they had a voice. I didn't want this to be something that was passive. And so the choices do a couple of things. They allow the student, or the player character in general, to kind of have some say over how the story will proceed. Again, I mentioned that, spoilers are going to help Ron, but you have choices about how willingly you help him. And there's some things that there are other choices that, branch off a little bit before they come back. And there's choices. You don't necessarily have to follow those branches. Students also, or the player gets to voice their own feelings. So maybe they are enthusiastic about something or not. Maybe they feel that they remember something from class, or maybe they don't. And so they get to have those choices. And again, they also get to choose to explore additional information if they like, but they don't have to. I really wanted to avoid questions that were about content specifically. So the content, at least in the first version and the version that I'm presenting on, the content really got kind of was, more in the story itself, and not, I wasn't just asking a question and the answer, you had to pick the right answer in your choice. I wanted to avoid that because I really wanted to avoid making the game just feel like a quiz in disguise. And I really wanted it to really be more the students engaging in the narrative and in dialogue with Ron and their own thoughts by themselves. More recently, I've started working with a collaborator on some follow-up work to this experiment, and we found some ways to include questions about content, but in ways that are a little more gentle and conversational within the dialogue. So I've seen that there are some possibilities for that as well, and so the dialogue can get used in a bunch of ways. And so I did implement this into one of my introduction to psychology classes. And so this data is from a couple of years ago, actually, but I'm still using and adapting the game, and there's been some more progress on what that looks like, which I'll mention a little bit of. So I gave kind of a small class, but half of my students played the game. Half of them I also created an alternate, well, everyone played the game and everyone did the alternate activity, but they did swap. And so I created an alternate activity. This was really based on a different biopsychological topic. So it's from the same chapter, but it wasn't related to neurons and action potentials. And so in the alternate activity, they were asked to draw a brain, label the lobes, write words, or draw images related to each lobe's function. And so I wanted them to at least be doing something else educational, something related to the same chapter, in case that was, kind of would at least kind of activate similar maybe areas of memory. But my goal here was really just to see if the game worked at all. So I knew going in, I wasn't looking to give this, compare this to slides or to lecture material. I really wanted to see, did this work at all? Not better, than, other, not, the same content, in a traditional method. Because again, it wasn't a given that it would help. It could be that this was neutral, and it didn't have any effect. It could have been that this was confusing or just a weird experience, and maybe it was, going to actually make, people, perform worse. So I really just want to kind of like compare it to, do something educational, so something engaging and active and educational. So they weren't just doing nothing, but compared to what they knew before they came into class, basically. And so everyone played the game, everyone did the activity, but I just kind of swapped it. So half the class did one thing first, half the class did the other. After the first activity, they had a content assessment and a survey. The content assessment had 25 questions. 20 of those questions were related to the game content, because that's really obviously what I was interested in. Questions were multiple choice, true or false. They are the kinds of things that you might find on, a quiz, but really, again, very straightforward about the content. And the survey was 17 questions, mostly rating scale, assessing students' experience with the game. Things like how much they enjoyed it, how much they felt that it helped them review course content. And I also had some open-ended questions to ask students about their favorite and least favorite parts of the game, how the story or the game could be improved. And they also completed a short questionnaire about their gaming experience outside of class, and some demographic questions as well. In this case, most of the class was freshmen. It was a real mix. We had a lot of health-related majors, technology-related majors, psychology, as well as some other things. And small class, there are 18 students who participated overall. And everyone completed both activities because I wanted them to have, the benefit of, whatever benefit that, if hopefully there was a benefit, but whatever benefit those both activities had. And but students were only assessed once. So after the first activity they completed, that's when they had their assessment, and then they completed the survey after playing the game. And so what I found, was that as I predicted and was happy to find, again, small sample, this was, and in this version, this was more or less kind of a proof of concept. But students who completed the game prior to the content assessment did score higher, statistically significantly higher on an assessment, on the assessment compared to students who had completed the alternate activity prior. I wound up analyzing this using a Mann-Whitney U test because the distributions were a little bit different because of the small sample size. And this, again, this was consistent with most of the, a lot of prior research, including some of the meta-analyses that exist. It was, there were some differences. And so in terms of, I want to make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. And so there were, some differences. For instance, so this might be then inconsistent with the Adams study that I mentioned, but it actually really was not really able to compare it to that study as well, because in that study they were comparing specifically to something that they were looking at, the comparison against traditional content. So, it was consistent with research in general that said that, games, seem like they work and there are benefits to this. And again, right now, this version at least was not as easily compared to this very visual discovery game compared to the slides where they did not find that benefit. And so just for the survey, in general, students did overall enjoy playing the game. They did think it was fun. And again, this was, I felt like this was kind of some of my quirky sense of humor. So I don't know if other people were going to engage in that. But this was fun for them. This was motivating. And again, even just the visual style, I did not know if students were going to engage in it. But they felt motivated to help Ron talk to the other neurons, which again is part of my goal. If the narrative worked, based on what the narrative literature suggests about how we, feel invested in a character and how we feel invested in a narrative, to the degree that that worked and that it was a good narrative and that story was engaging, we should have seen people motivated to help Ron and engaging with him. And so people did feel motivated to help Ron. They wanted to complete the game. They did overall feel that the game helped them to review what they already had learned. So this was after we had had a lecture on neurons and action potentials. They felt that it helped them review, and they did. There were some new things in there that were a little more advanced or separate from things that we had learned in class. So overall, they did think that it did teach them something new. And so this was, again, really positive feedback and really, I was thrilled to see some of this. I couldn't confirm necessarily. So again, I didn't have, kind of pre-test, post-test. So I couldn't tell necessarily, did people, were the people who felt that they learned, did they actually do better? I wasn't able to do those kinds of comparisons. But again, overall, the game, the results, definitely showed evidence that this helped. And people were liking this. And all of the students did complete the survey. So whenever they completed the game, again, content assessment was just after that first activity, whichever it was, but everyone did complete the survey. So the survey was from all 18 students. So again, this was proof of concept. So definitely was, there's room for, growth here, and I am continuing to build on this study. But what I liked about this was that it kind of did give options. So as kind of stepping back and as a professor, this did show, at least again, as proof of concept, this works. If I want to, be able to engage my students in some kind of a game or something like that, and I have an idea, but I don't have the skill, or I don't have, the funding, or even if I don't have the funding yet, then I can at least try to engage. If I can write a story, then this was a pretty, relatively easy way, to be able to start engaging in this and, practicing this as a professor, and also to be able to engage my students in this. And with Twine, it was also nice, the story could have been more elaborate, or it could have been less elaborate. And so, depending on how many branches you have, or if you want to use images or things, if there's maybe they want to go off in this section and they want to, and we have a thought bubble or something, and they're reviewing something, and we have a diagram from class. Like, there are ways that I don't include something like that right now, but I do envision some version that may include something like that in the future. And so, we can make this more elaborate, longer, more pathways. And so this could be something that I even use to pilot a narrative. Maybe I do have funding and I am going to have all the bells and whistles and, visuals and high-tech animation. But I want to see does this narrative work first? Do students connect with this character? This is still a way that I can try to get that part first before I maybe invest and spend that money to really develop something. And so it gives kind of lots of options because it can be a starting point or it can be something that's more of a pilot. And more research is needed, especially in terms of, having, a larger sample, in terms of looking at, some of the different kinds of, you know, different kinds of games, different individual differences, what characteristics of the games and what characteristics of the students, make for a good match here. Again, it was a smaller sample, so I'm still looking at some of the things and still interested in looking at some more of those individual differences, but need more participants and more, more of our follow-ups are more interested in kind of looking at some of that. But this research again is still developing, and there are some debates in the literature. But my thoughts personally are that a lot of this comes down to probably the type of game and the implementation and the match of kind of how the content is integrated and a lot of those kinds of things. But more research is needed. Those are my thoughts right now. So in terms of strategies, I want to really think about kind of strategies of how to kind of continue, build and how to kind of implement this also ourselves. There's lots of places where we can be working on. I'll actually mention one more thing actually about just in terms of where some of this is going. So one other bit of feedback, let me go back for actually just a second here. One other, in terms of more research and building on this, the one bit of feedback that there were two bits of feedback that I do want to mention that my students also had was, so again, we saw they liked the game, they were motivated. I was thrilled actually about a third of the open-ended responses for people's favorite part of the game. It had something to do with Ron or helping Ron. So students really engaged with this character and really, wanted to be involved with him. Students also reported that they did miss visuals. And so I did ask students about kind of, if they would have liked, I don't remember how I worded it at the moment, but, things about visuals, images and animation. Students did miss visuals, they would have preferred them for sure. And, so that is something to, be aware of. Students definitely engaged with us. They enjoyed it, but they are used to that and they did miss having that. And there might be some good things about having those kinds of things. Students also felt that it was a lot of reading. So there was, because all you were doing was reading and clicking through and, we had kind of smaller sections, so it was broken up. But there were some decent blocks of text in certain scenes. And participants did feel like there was, a lot of reading. And so recently, actually, my collaborator and I received a small grant from the APS Teaching Fund, and we're going to be using that to implement voiceovers and also some visuals into the game. And so the voiceovers should help ease that burden of so much reading. And also make the game more accessible. And so for people maybe who are having difficulty with the comprehension, or even for people who are have low vision or something like that, we want to make that game more accessible. And it's also having those elements and having that funding is going to allow us to really be able to test the effect and in follow-up research, test the effect of having voiceovers or visuals, and or visuals in these kinds of educational games and what impact that might have. And how engaging and enjoyable it is. And again, there might be a balance there. Maybe we find, depending on the kinds of images we want, it's a small grant. We're not going to have a lot of funding to do lots of animation and things like that. But we're hoping to get some background art, makes things at least a little more engaging than just plain black background and white text. We're hoping to have a character design for Ron, so we can actually see Ron, and at least some simple still kind of things like that. To make things more engaging. And that also might be helpful because maybe students might engage more when they can see Ron. And we're hoping that he will be, our goal, I think right now is kind of, scientifically accurate, but cute, and looking like a character that we want to be interacting with, which I think might be a tall order, but hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. But maybe that might make students engage more, but maybe if that might, kind of take away from, some of that, it might get confusing with some of that kind of, which part is the educational part and which part is the presentation. And that's some stuff that I'm actually a little more interested in right now too. Is there any confusion about some of the parts that are just narrative, and can students tell the difference? And so, as we get maybe more of that and build on that, and that's some of the questions out of the Adams study had to do with, cognitive overload, or, does this take away from it? Is it distracting? So maybe there's going to be more engagement, but is that going to affect learning negatively? And I think it's also important, again, I started off saying, I don't think it's important for games to necessarily be more effective than traditional learning. But if they're as effective, then maybe that gives students options. Even if the student is willing to play a game, but they're not willing to spend the time reading a textbook, even if a game is slightly less effective than a textbook, if they're going to play the game, they're going to spend the time on that they wouldn't otherwise spend. As long as it's, they're getting something out of it, that still might have a place. And so some of our follow-up studies are also looking at some of that. So some of what we've looked at recently is we created a really carefully controlled version of the same content from the game in kind of a textbook style presentation, using actually quotes from OER texts. And so this wasn't just stuff we were writing. This is, kind of, mixed and matched a little bit, but this was, content that was actually out there in open educational resources. And so we're looking at kind of some of that comparison. Some of that is still in progress. And so, which is why I'm not presenting more on that part today. But that's also some of what we're interested in looking at. And so strategies, so applying this. And so I'm going to gear this. I know we have a lot of faculty here too, but I know we have some students as well. So some of this is a little more geared towards students, but I think also this is something where, students can be looking for these resources and making use of them, but so can faculty, honestly. And so hopefully that will be something that, if you're interested in this, and I'm always happy to talk about these things. I'm really, really interested in them. But and I'm thrilled to chat about them, but there's also just some really good resources online. So I'll point you to a few in terms of variety, in terms of specific resources, in terms of variety, and in terms of some things to think about maybe. And so one of the early things that I had found when I started teaching stats when I came here. So I had had background in stats, but had never taught it before. I had been a teaching assistant for a stats course as well. This is my first time teaching a full stats course. And so I had plugged into CAUSE, which is an undergrad for statistical education organization, professional organization. And I was really, it's a great, if you teach stats, highly recommend you look them up, or if you're interested in stats, they have some great stuff. And I was really surprised and intrigued to find that they have their fun collection on their website that includes, includes an art gallery, cartoons. I'm seeing food here. I haven't seen the food, so now I'm curious. Games, jokes, all of these poems, all of these songs, all these kinds of things. And so you can kind of look for, what you want to look for, whether by topic or by type. And so that's something that can be really helpful and really interesting. If you're looking to, implement, this is again specifically for stat stuff, but if you teach stats and you want to implement stuff and you want to implement a cartoon or a song, you can look those things up by topic. And so they have options there, and that's stuff that they're continuing to build on. So they have, again, a lot of resources there for, again, variety of different topics. And they also have their amusing competition, so which they have every year. You can see already their kind of sense of humor with Mew being in that name. And they are always having entries for jokes or cartoons, poetry, songs, and videos. So they really are kind of really like using this and really have space, within the organization, within their website, to kind of highlight these kinds of activities, which has been really exciting and a fun resource as well. Some of the individuals who I've gotten to interact with through that organization, Dennis Pearl and Larry Lesser, had a paper out in 2023, and in some of the supplementary, it's talking about these kinds of fun activities that they've used, and that kind of talking through some of these different kinds of things. This was a slide from their supplemental materials, and so. Again, if you're kind of familiar with using graphs and statistics and things like that, you might, if you're not, you might already kind of be looking at this and at least seeing the kind of the humor in the, the way that they're framing this, the title here. If you teach stats, you might be, or you're familiar with using bar graphs like this, you might kind of see what they're doing here. And so we have a lot of stuff going on. We have the imagery where we kind of have these bars and we've set them up. So we kind of have it looking like the Irish flag. We're actually looking at the population of Dublin here, and our title is Dublin, Dublin. And here the bar graphs have been made to look like this is in 2022, that the population is double, but really this has to do more with kind of how we've created this, has to do with the proportional ink principle. We need to, be our starting point on our y-axis and all of these kinds of things. And this was again supplemental from their article, Visualizing Statistical Elements. What you see, visualizing statistical edutainment. What you see is what you get. And they have a whole variety. They both use a lot of really cool, really fun and interesting kinds of activities. And once I saw this, I have a slide that does something similar that is much more boring than this. And I was like, I have to start using this version in my slides. I think I'm actually giving that lecture later today. And so I will hopefully remember to steal this over, because I don't know if I replaced it in this class's slideshow yet. Other kinds of activities, I don't know if others are aware of Dr. Raven, the science maven. She's known for using a lot of kinds of activities. She does a lot of other kinds of things, science communication and training and other things. So highly recommend looking her up. But one of the things that she was known for a little bit earlier was using songs and rap and other kinds of things, specifically looking more in kind of biology and other, more of that kind of area, and so more science. We also have the virtual ongoing interdisciplinary collaborations on educating with song or voices. And so this is an organization that I've also gotten involved with. I mentioned Larry Lesser and Dennis Pearl have also been involved with this. So it's separate, kind of connected to cause, but a separate, because of the Dennis's involvement, but a separate entity that specifically is looking at using song. And again, I am also interested in using song. I've used some songs in my statistics classes where I've put kind of statistical lyrics and concepts and vocabulary terms to melodies. And again, I'm also interested in seeing, does that matter if students like the song, if it's familiar to them? There's lots of elements of those songs that we can think about that might matter for helping students remember. But if they can remember that, melody, then that might kind of give them an in to help remember those new lyrics. And again, some of the early research that I have on that, I didn't want to take too much time today, so I want to make sure I could focus on one thing. But some of the research on that I've done so far on song also, and so a lot of the prior work also suggests that this is something that can be helpful. And I've had students report to me, oh yeah, like I had trouble remembering that formula, but I could, they could, sing it in their head, and they can do that. That's something they can bring into their test with them, because they can sing it in their head to help remember how to do that process. And so that's something that is really interesting and helpful for students. And it also is something that students can become more involved in. And so that's kind of getting to my next, part here. And, in terms of, these are places that you can, go for some resources, and some, whether it's, for depending on your topic, depending on what you're looking to be using. But for, students and also for faculty and thinking about doing things in class, I recommend to my students, even when I, teach on memory, and how do we, apply what we know about memory to studying and to learning, make it more interactive, interact more deeply into, things, doing things passively and just reading or flipping through my slides is more passive. The more I interact, and interact more deeply into that topic, the more I'm going to remember, make things more meaningful, add cues, use mnemonics. And so all of these things can be things that can be really helpful. So, if you need to remember, you're going to have to label this diagram, draw it out. Even if, I tell my students, like, I'm not an artist, draw a neuron. It can be, a circle with a line and, just whatever you need to do, but draw it out. Use Play-Doh, use mental images, come up with silly mental images. Come up with, I always kind of say, the fun and the silly stuff, that's what I remember. If I make a joke out of it, if I make something that rhymes, those are things that, oh, I did that silly thing, and then I can kind of remember it a little better. Make up songs, whatever melody is in your head right now, that whatever vocabulary term or concept that you're trying to remember, how can you maybe word that definition or word an explanation of that concept so that it can go to the melody? And again, there's like kind of longer conversations we can have about how to do that. And, and that's not always easy. I've had some students work on writing some of those things. It's not always easy. You kind of got to get the syllable count right and things like that. But it can be really effective. Rhymes, poetry, write a story, make up a character. I remember when I was taking science in high school, I made up the little character. She didn't really do much, but I had polypeptide. She was, that was, I can come up with little things to help me remember. And if she did one thing to help me remember something about that, then that might be worth at least coming up with that little silly thing. And so, yeah, I think fun still works, as we want to prepare students for their careers and for being professionals, but also sometimes the fun stuff is going to help us get there, and it's okay to use it. It's effective, and it's okay to do something that's going to allow us to engage a little more. And as a faculty member, I'll also say using these things and creating these things has also been more fun and enjoyable for me also, and being able to use that creativity and be able to relate to my students more. We can talk about games. We can, kind of gives another opportunity to, just have more openness with our students as well. And so, yeah, I do want to just acknowledge, CTL, the Online Learning Consortium, instructor Ryan Straight. I would not have gotten to make this game and figure out how to do this without all of that. And also the Emerging Technology Implementation Grant was very, very helpful. Really grateful that we have those kinds of opportunities here. Thank you.
All right, so thanks so much, Nicole. That was a great talk. Do we have any questions from the audience?
I'll start us off. Hi, Nicole. I'm Henry Ruiz from Biological and Chemical Sciences. It was very nice to hear you talk, so thank you. I have a quick question about the design of your study for the data that you did present. So I know you said both students took both. All students took the game, but yet data that you presented was of half of the students who took it, and then the other who did an alternative. Can you just explain that when you get a chance? And then the second question has to do with the scalability of this approach, right? So this is to teach an action potential, which is and I teach biology, so it's a tiny proportion of a very big system. How do you see this being scaled up?
That's a really excellent question. And so the first part is in terms of the study. So all of the students. So basically, in terms of just practicality. So I reserved one of the computer labs, on campus. I'm here on the Long Island campus, and so I reserved one of the CLC rooms. And basically, I set things up ahead of time so that basically, I had one row of this, one row of that, wherever students sat. We didn't normally meet in that room, so students didn't have like a normal place where they were going to sit. So basically wherever they sat, that was the condition they were in. And so it was set up so that it prompted them to do, one version or the other. So, half of them did the game to start, half of them did the drawing activity to start. Then when they finished, that first activity, everyone did the assessment. And then after the people who had the game first took the survey also at that point. And then, everyone then at that point then went on to the opposite activity. So the people who had done the drawing activity did the game. The people who had done the game first did the drawing activity. And then the people who did that drawing activity first and did the game second, they got that survey at the end. So.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. And yeah, in terms of scaling it up, yeah, and yeah, this is a small part. We don't, if for my courses, we're not teaching, as much. We are. I'm hoping to, that we're gonna, I'm hoping to propose eventually more of a, cognitive neuroscience course or something that goes into a little bit more detail. Right now, the most detail we get is really in my physiological basis of behavior course, and that's, it's more fine-tuned, but we don't necessarily go, as much to scale as you probably do in biology. I definitely think that there's room for it to scale up, and my collaborator and I have been talking a little bit about that. And so we've been talking about ideas about kind of, so I've been collaborating with Thomas Bazo. He's actually an alum of our psych department. We weren't working on this when he was here. I actually ran into him at a conference when I was presenting this, and we were at the same session actually before my presentation. We were at the same session on using games in teaching. And so we wound up starting collaborating about that. And there's also an undergraduate student, Gianna Salib, who's also been working on some of the textbook comparison and looking specifically more at long-term memory. So she presented also on something earlier this year at a conference. But again, that's still in progress. But what we're kind of envisioning, Thomas and I, is something that we maybe have modules. And so maybe within the game, we have, some options about, maybe you go here and you play this, first, and then maybe there's sections where you can, if you've already done this part, maybe for homework, you had to play this section of the game. And then there's an option maybe where you can kind of skip to the second part, maybe for that, next week you do that part. But really to expand this, and there's a couple of, and there might be different ways to do that. For the game, we envision eventually, maybe there's something like a playable textbook where there's different topics. That's very large scale, very long term, but something, and probably not right for every course or every topic. There's some topics in my intro class that are more serious that I wouldn't want to gamify probably, or at least not in this way. But something like this, I think there's, opportunities for other characters. I think we've talked about, Thomas was considering ways that we could think about like kind of the innervation of the arm, and maybe you travel throughout the body in different ways, and maybe you meet some of the larger nerves in the arm, and maybe we're taking some license with what a character is. Maybe a character is sometimes a gland, or maybe it's a structure like the hippocampus. Maybe it's just one neuron, maybe it's a nerve. So we're maybe taking some license with that. Yeah, I see Magic School Bus, Jennifer. Yeah, absolutely. That's really kind of the thinking here, but we're allowing it to be interactive, so that in Magic School Bus for college students, and with this kind of gamified interactive kind of component. And yeah, maybe we meet some of I think Thomas was thinking of some of the nerves in the arm maybe being like maybe these are Ron's big brothers or something, and maybe we go down the arm and we learn something about the innervation of the arm, and then maybe we come back and, well, now Ron's been talking to the other neurons, so maybe he has more information he can give us. Maybe there's something happening outside the body. Maybe we find out that there's something's going on, and we find out, oh, there's something that we were allergic to, and it's and the person is sneezing, and we're seeing the histamine, and like maybe there's different places that we can go and ways that we can do that. And I think that would probably look like more different modules, and maybe you're able to choose, maybe there's some linear progression there. Maybe you're able to choose and jump around, and yeah, maybe I want to go to the hippocampus now, but I want to go to the arm another time. So I think there is ways to expand that. Again, that's much more long term. And I think right now we are thinking about kind of expanding and improving things in a couple of ways. So we are looking to expand and have like another module. but we're also looking to, yeah, let's get things a little more visual. Let's, make a little more appealing, and have some voiceovers and things. But yeah, we're thinking about doing it modularly. And I think that's also from a, creative and, from the professor's, and then the creator's perspective would also make it more manageable, to branch out. And yeah, I think, yeah, depending on what, how that integrates into the system, then yeah, it might take some creativity to figure out, yeah, what does that story look like? What does the player do? What's the point? What's the goal? Like, there's a whole narrative thing that I feel like is probably a collaboration with humanities too. Um, so yeah, there's a lot to think about. So I hope that kind of answers your question, and I'd love to talk more. If you're interested in this kind of thing, I really would love to talk more. I'm curious kind of to think of now how that could integrate for the larger system.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Right. I think we're probably about out of time, but if any other questions? And we have some students in the audience. Any students have any burning questions about Professor Calma-Roddin's game? Okay. Well, if not, thank you again, Nicole. That was a great talk, and thank you all for joining us here today. So we'll be back actually in about 3 weeks, actually, on May 1st for our last talk of the term, when Professor Ballet Wen from the Department of Mathematics will be speaking about his work on asymptotic transport in strongly nonlinear thermal convection. All right, so thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.